There is a better, faster, easier way to make router trays. And the best part? You don't need a bandsaw, and you don't need a router table either. In a previous video, I showed the process for making this router tray. Now don't get me wrong, the process was great and it worked out beautifully, but it was way too complicated. Bit after bit after bit. Now that I've added a bunch of new templates to my store and that I've made a few of these, I think I've come up with something way less complicated. And instead of using a router table and a bandsaw, we're gonna do it all with a handheld router and a jigsaw. You wanna start with a blank that's big enough for your template. I've already glued this one up using some birch and some walnut. I'm using 4/4 rough lumber that's been planed down to about 7/8 thick, which will give me enough room to make a decent cavity. Unlike last time where I stuck down the template, this time I'm just going to start by tracing the template out onto my blank using a pencil. You just want to make sure to hold it down tight so it doesn't move around on you. Once everything is traced out, we can start shaping this serving tray. Now I realize that a lot of people don't have a bandsaw, so we're going to cut out this shape using a jigsaw. And unlike last time, I'm going to start by cutting the outer shape so that my jigsaw has a nice flat surface to ride on. Now, I've secretly always hated jigsaws, but recently I learned about something that changed that. Scrolling blades. Yes, you can buy blades that are made for scrolling like the one on the right here. You can see how small it is compared to a regular blade, and it has a lot of teeth, which makes it easier to make tight turns and get much cleaner cuts. I'll leave a link to the ones I use down below. These blades have made me hate using jigsaws just a little less. You want to cut as close to the line as possible, leaving no more than 1/8 of an inch of material outside the line. This is to make refining the shape much safer, but we'll get back to that in a bit. With that done, I'm going to tackle the inside. This time I'll start with a Forstner bit to remove as much waste as I can. You can use different size Forstner bits to best match the nooks and curves of your workpiece. As you can see, the tip of the Forstner bit goes a lot deeper than the teeth, so it's important to use the tip as your reference when setting the depth stop. I figure I want to leave myself about 1/4 inch of wood at the bottom of the tray. I'll use a piece of 1/4 inch stock to set the depth of the tip, then lock it in. I like to start by going around the inner edges, being careful to stay inside the lines. I can then switch to a larger Forstner bit, and don't forget you need to reset the depth here, and then hog away what's left in the middle. By using a Forstner bit to first remove as much waste as possible, this should save me from a lot of endless routing. Alright, so this is what it looks like after carving out all the inner pockets. It doesn't have to be perfect. You can see some small chunks left here, but you can just use a chisel to pop some of them off if you want. The idea is to remove most of the waste so you can save some time with the router, which is what I'm going to do next. At this point, we can stick on the template using double-sided template tape. I talked about this last time. This tape is the best I've found. It won't damage the wood or leave any residue, which means you can reuse the templates. I'll leave a link to this down below. And I don't skimp on the tape either because I want to make sure it's stuck on tight. Next, I'll grab my plunge router and a straight flush trim plunge bit, which looks like this. I'm only going to go about 5/8 to 3/4 inch deep, so this bit will work well on its own. You'll also notice that I've got an oversized acrylic base for my router, and I showed how to make this in the previous video if you want to check that out. This helps to keep the router stable and prevents it from tipping over. There's one more important thing before I begin, and that's to stick down the blank to my workbench so it doesn't move around. I'm using double-sided tape, which works well for me, or you could simply clamp it down to the workbench. I like using tape so that there's nothing in my way. Alright, so you want to start with shallow passes and clean away the waste as you go. Just make sure the bearing is deep enough to ride along the template. You can see I've just started flushing up the edges for now, without worrying about the bottom just yet. I'll keep working on those edges until they are all flushed up with the template. Now that the edges are clean and flush, I can start plunging deeper to clean up the bottoms. I'll just bottom out the router into one of the cavities, then set that as my 0. From there, I'll adjust the depth to 1/8. And with that, I'll plunge the router into the bottom. I find it's best to keep the router moving when plunging, otherwise you'll get a lot of burning. Same thing with any corners. Try not to stay there, but instead make short, quick, multiple passes to minimize burn marks. Alright, we're getting there. I'm about half an inch deep at this point, but we've still got the drill marks showing. I think one final plunge should do the trick. At this point for the final plunge, you can switch over to a bowl and tray bit like this one. It's got rounded edges, so this will make those inner edges round, giving it a more polished look. It's totally optional though. I'm going to just keep going with a straight bit for this one. So I'll adjust the plunge depth by another 1/8 deeper, then just go around and around, deeper and deeper, until we have nice, clean, flat bottom pockets. All that's left now is to finish the outer edges. In my previous video, I showed how to do this on the router table using a 1/4 inch spiral flush trim bit, but today I'm going to try this with a handheld router using this flush trim bit. This one has 3 knives, which will give me a cleaner cut. With the bit loaded up in my router, you can see the bearing is here on the bottom, which means I'll need to flip my blank upside down so the bearing could ride along the template. But I can't have the template sitting against my workbench, so I'll need to elevate it somehow. To do so, I'll use 3 even blocks and of course some more double-sided tape. I'll stick down the blocks inside the tray, close to the edges for greater stability, then add some more tape, flip it over, and stick it down to my workbench. Again, you could use clamps here instead. They might get in the way and need to be repositioned, but that's always an option. Now all that's left is to lower the bit so that the bearing is up against the template. Then fire it up and watch the chips fly. I like to take multiple relatively quick passes rather than trying to power through it all in one pass. You'll get less burn marks and it'll make it easier on your router and the bits. And just like that, we have a perfect circle. Okay, I'm going to keep the setup that I have here and just switch over to a round over bit to round over all the edges. Once the bottom side is done, I'll flip it over, which is easier said than done. At this point, I can also remove the template. The trick is to find a small gap to get the pry bar in and gently lift it off. I can then peel away the tape and save this template for next time. Okay, I'll now round over all the edges on the top side. Just remember, counterclockwise around the outside edges and clockwise around the inside edges. It's looking pretty awesome already, but feels pretty rough to the touch. Luckily, I stocked up on sanding accessories at Princess Auto. They have these awesome drill sanding attachments for the inner pockets, this smushy sanding block, and probably the best thing I found at Princess Auto is this anti-slip drawer liner material. It's my new favorite must-have accessory for sanding. Just cut off a piece and put it under whatever you're sanding. So instead of sliding around on your workbench, it'll basically stick in place. Plus, it's padded so you won't get any scratch marks on the backside. After it's all sanded in smooth, I'll apply a finish. Since my last video, I started using a new finish that I fell in love with. Total Boat Wood Honey. It's super easy to apply, totally food safe, and it gives the wood a rich, warm, silky smooth feel. Just flood the surface, let it sit for 20 minutes, and wipe it off. You can check out all of my router templates on my website at DIYmontreal.com. I've added some new round trays and some holiday themed templates too that you can use to make really great Christmas gifts. Until next time, thanks for watching, see you soon.